Hello, this is Harriet Fraad with Capitalism Hits Home. It's a show brought to you by our Patreon members and by Democracy at Work. This show tries to capture the mutual shaping and mutual creation of personal life, emotional life, cultural life, political life, and economic life in the USA today. Today, I want to talk about rape and sexual abuse. They are very much in the news, whether they're the news of R. Kelly being tried for multiple sexual abuse of underage girls, or Governor Cuomo on trial in the public eye for sexually harassing and coercing his female staff while he bullies the entire staff, male and female, or whether it's reports of sexual assaults that are in the daily news every day. So in talking about rape, I want to talk about who does the raping, why they do it, their gender. I want to talk about the intersections with gender, with culture, with class, with capitalism in U.S. society. And so I will begin. First of all, who is responsible for sexual assaults and rapes? Well, it's men who assault and rape other men, and although they primarily assault and rape women. And why? Why would they do that? Why would men be the perpetrators and not women? Now, of course, male physiology facilitates rape, but women can always grab men and harass them. And in fact, some women do coerce their underlings at the office into going out with them or having sex with them. But rape is a male phenomenon. And how come? Well, let's first look at the gender stereotype involved. One of the big gender stereotypes for maleness is invulnerability. Showing emotion is considered a weakness associated with women, who are considered often inferior. It's there in language. Pussy is an insult. Coaches, when they're reproaching, male coaches, I should say, when they're reproaching their male team members, say, "What's the matter? You're a girl? What's the matter? You on your period?" And so on. You play like a girl, big insult. Female coaches say, "What's the matter? You're playing like a man? You got a dick, honey?" No, that's not there in the language. Now, if we want to look at a real hotbed of sexual assault and rape in the United States, we should look to the military, our best funded operation, and also the most rife with rape and sexual assault. And we'll try to look at the qualities of the military, which makes it such a hotbed of sexual abuse. Well, in 2018, 20,500 service members were sexually assaulted or raped. 13,000 women and 7,500 men. The rate of sexual abuse of women has gone up 50% since women have become more active in the military, since more and more women enter the military, since women have been allowed higher posts in the military. So that what used to be a male terrain is being invaded, if you want to look at it that way, or joined by women. And so Men are more threatened than they used to be in the military. And of course, we ought to understand that this high estimate of a 50% increase is, of course, a low figure because women don't report their rapes about 76% of the time, according to the stats. And also in the military, where women report sexual abuse, it's taken to the higher command, who are often sexual abusers themselves and know the servicemen who have perpetrated this sex abuse and want to let them off the hook. So women are humiliated for having reported it and therefore disciplined not to say anything when they're sexually abused or raped. Another aspect of the male stereotype is that men are allowed very few needs. Within the common stereotype, men are not allowed vulnerability, hurt, need to be soothed, need to be comforted outside of the realm of sex, the one need that men are really allowed to feel and even brag about to other men. The only emotional outlets that are there for men within that stereotype are aggression and anger. There's a wonderful book that came out last year by Jared Yates Sexton about his own gender upbringing, which is called The Man They Wanted Me to Be, and how hard it was for him to be a sentient, feeling human within the stereotype that they wanted him to live up to. The outlets for men, let's say sports outlets, are very aggressive. Men may have physical contact with each other, but they're hurling themselves on one another, stopping one another from functioning. Or in basketball, they're guarding one another. And then when one of them gets a basket, the others pat him on the ass, which is also kind of interesting. Other men's sports, whether they're lacrosse or to a certain extent soccer as well, men's soccer, which is different from women's soccer, involves quite a bit of violence as an outlet. So that you say, now, wait a minute, how can men get away with this? Why is this culture allowed to grow? You look at the people who've been in the news lately, whether they're R. Kelly, who abused young girls, or Cuomo, who abused young women, or Weinstein, or Epstein, or any of them, or Cosby. Everyone knew. The way that Cosby's sex abuse was leaked is a comedian made a joke about it because it was a known fact that Cosby drugged and abused women. Why? Everyone knew that Weinstein raped and abused women sexually, but he got away with it. Why? Why did they get away with it? Well, I think there is a discipline among men not to intervene when they see other men's behavior being sexually aggressive and inappropriate. There's a pressure to say nothing. I remember I had, and those pressures of men to be tough are sexually and culturally enforced starting in nursery school. I remember a client of mine telling her that her son wore sandals to school because those are his favorite shoes. And when he got there to nursery school, some of the other boys said, "Those are girls' shoes. You're a girl." And he said, "These are my favorite shoes and you're hurting my feelings," because they were from an enlightened household, and they laughed at him because they were laughing at a little boy claiming feelings and being hurt. And they were disciplining him to wear manly footwear at 4 years old. All of those people who are recently in the spotlight tolerated the sexual abuse they saw around them. All the people around R. Kelly knew that his wife, who he married at 15 by getting someone to alter the stats, was his girlfriend since she was 13 and he was 26. Everyone knew in the entourage who came to visit Epstein's estate that there were very young girls hanging on him. And he would go after his meetings with scientists, because his cover was that he was a science maven, science expert. They saw him going off with one of those girls about every hour or so. And the other times he was surrounded by them, touching him at these meetings. And they said nothing. There are other gender inputs that allow bystanders and standers, and particularly men, to tolerate the sex abuse around them. One is that Americans are generally a passive group of people. In the Daily News today was a photograph and a video of a woman who was collecting cans for money while a guy tried to steal her purse, and she was grabbing onto her pocketbook and he was dragging her, and the onlookers looked on and did nothing. In the same way, they know children are being abused and they do nothing. So that there is a passivity about Americans that is frightening and sad. There's another factor. This was written up by Dorothy Dinnerstein in her book, The Mermaid and the Minotaur, which is that little boys, as well as girls, grow up in a matriarchy. At their most humiliating and helpless period of their lives, they are commanded by seemingly omnipotent women. Their mothers, their daycare workers are women. Their babysitters are women. Their nurses are women. And so their most vulnerable time is dominated by powerful women. Girls understand that they will grow up to be powerful women. Boys have, and also often discriminate against other women, partly because culturally they're supposed to revere males more, and partly because they too were helpless at the hands of seemingly omnipotent women, almost witch-like in their power. And that's why the villains in children's books are overwhelmingly powerful women. The wicked stepmother, the lady ogre who eats children. They're these hideous female figures, because children have, on the one hand, the nurturing mother that they need, and on the other hand, the angry stepmother. And they separate them out into two different people because they need their mothers so badly. And many men separate women into two different groups, the Madonna and the whore. It's there in Christianity, the Virgin Mary and Magdalene. And it's all right to rape women who look sexy because they're the whores. They're in that group of the women you can hate and you can aggress against and you can sexually humiliate. The movement Slut Walk, which was a movement with a lot of young women dressing as alluringly as they wanted, with signs saying, the way you dress isn't a crime. Rape is a crime. Don't blame us. To get that point across. But there is a kind of hatred that a lot of men have towards women and towards their sexual need of women. Dorothy Dinnerstein points out that within today's culture, little boys rarely have an at-home gender model of masculinity, of a man who cares for them and is with them and takes them out. That's different in Europe, where men spend much more time with their children or are given time off to do so. But in the United States, that's not true. There are whole sectors where women are left alone when they're pregnant. 42% of children are born outside of a lasting union or marriage and are brought up by women. And in those cultures, boys define their manhood as, I am a man because I'm a not woman. They are different from me. They're out there, the hoes and bitches, not me. That's why in rap you hear these songs like Took That Hoe, Threw Her on Flow, and so on. Because those are families in which there is the least male participation in the upbringing of their young children and their vulnerable children. There is an allowable rage against women. Pop music is full of of hatred of women, and particularly sexual aggression against women. There is no equivalent that I've found in female pop music. For example, in the lyrics and video of the very popular song by Robin Thicke, One Thing I Ask of You, let me be the one you back that ass into. Had a bitch, but she ain't bad as you. So hit me up when you pass through. I'll give you something to tear your ass into. Nothing like your last guy. He too square for you. He doesn't smack that ass. He don't pull your hair like that. So I'm just watching and waiting for you to salute that true big pimpin', as if being a pimp, exploiting women's sexuality for money is something really exciting. Not too many people can refuse this pimpin'. I'm a nice guy, but don't get confused. It's pimping. I know you want it. 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 But you're a good girl. Now, that I know you want it is a refrain that one hears all the time with sex abusers, even sex abusers of 4 and 5-year-old girls who hardly know what's happening. The rapist or abuser says, I know she wanted it. She came on to me. And they're talking about a child. And there really is no equally violent sexuality in female culture against men. And even where women are kind of proudly claiming that they're whores and talk about fleecing men for money, I'll swipe my ass like your credit card. You know, it's not the same as violence, sexual violence, and physical humiliation of men. That's a male thing. There are other cultural aspects besides gender and gender raising, and I must say that is everywhere. When my little 4-year-old daughter, when I sent her to day camp, the first day she came back and told me some boy pulled up her dress. I called angrily and talked to the Y where she was at day camp and told them what happened. They said, hey, that's boys. What do you? So I immediately asked for my money back and withdrew my daughter, because that kind of tolerance is what happens and where it starts. But in addition to that violence and that culture of sexual violence in the military and elsewhere in pop music, there's also a sexual permission to abuse in religion. The Catholic Church has spent over $3 billion paying out for priest sex abuse. And that has been tolerated in the church. France just came out with their estimates Well, there are reports of child abuse, and we have to understand that about 1/4 of child abuse and sexual abuse is reported, but 300,000 priests, no, 300,000 young people have been abused by priests in France alone since 1950. And of course, that's an undercount based on reports. Now, why does religion read sex abuse? It does in part because of the shame it gives to a natural process like sex. It was interesting in Bachoven's report. Bachoven was a ethnologist, very famous. He wrote that in the island of Tahiti and other islands, rape was unknown till the missionaries got there, until men were thought of as the sexual aggressor and were also been giving shame about their sexual needs. And women were being taught to withhold sex from men and be out of touch with their own sexual needs. One of the reasons that Kristen Godsey's book, Why Sex is Better Under Socialism, is so telling is that socialist countries on which she reports, whether they're the former East Germany or the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, did away with religion. And they also created economic equality for women and government support for women's domestic labor, meals you could take home from your factory, low-cost restaurants, all sorts of endorsements and allowances so that women weren't dependent on men and therefore feeling they had to meet men's needs while men didn't need to meet their needs. And they were educated as they are in Scandinavia. In sex education, they learned that starting in junior high, that they had sexual needs and why they had sexual needs and how to handle them. And then in high school, how to handle relationships, considering their sexual needs, which were allowed, and the male sexual needs. And so they could negotiate a relationship, as well as taught their responsibility for using birth control or their responsibility to other human beings they may create in their sexuality. That's a far, far cry from the United States, in which most states don't have sexually correct sex education, no less sex relational education. So that we're talking about a whole cultural matrix of religion and the way the culture treats sexuality. Even in a country like France, which is sort of nominally Catholic, every other block has a condom machine on it. And you could get the morning after pill in high school, as well as you can get birth control in high school. And healthcare, including birth control, is free, with no questions asked. Another thing that creates rape and sexual assault in our culture is we are in a culture of violence. America is in a war all the time. And I'm not counting the wars that are just words like war on poverty. Forget that. It's a war on the poor, maybe, but not on poverty. Actually, the biggest line item on our budget is for armaments, for war. And that's so, even though no one has invaded our country since the British. The only wars that have been fought on U.S. soil is the Civil War, where we were at war with each other. And the weapons of violence are financed, and the war machine is financed all over 130 countries, even though we've lost all the wars we've participated in since World War II. Korea was a draw. We didn't win over North and South Korea together. We didn't win North Korea. We didn't win North Vietnam. We didn't win in Iraq. We didn't win in Afghanistan. And then those two, we ran for our lives. Everybody saw on TV massive evacuations. And although the TV personality said, we should have negotiated better. No, you weren't negotiating. You were running for your life. You lost. And that was somehow lost on the American people, who still condone violence in their war movies and in the rest of their culture. The films often have very violent and sexually violent scenes. Video games, which are mainly played by young boys, are very violent. Boys have toys like Rock'em Sock'em robots and guns in the United States. Very violent. Because I'm interested in it, I visited the toy stores in other countries, France, Sweden. There are no guns as toys in those countries, but they are in ours. In the media, on the buses, you see on the billboards, make my day. I saw one where someone has a gun on someone else's neck. Two men have guns on their neck. And we rarely see portrayals of males doing sweet things, kind things, talking to understand one another's problems, taking care of each other, being kind, providing for each other. And, there is a joke really, Porn for Women, which is put out by the Cambridge Women's Pornography Collective. And I'll read you 2 sections for Porn for the Working Woman. This is the picture. And it says, as the boss is there, wait a minute, this can't be right. Our female employees earn 15% less than our male ones. Get Johnson from HR on the phone. Tell him to fix this and issue checks for back pay. Here's another one, Porn for Women, which is interesting that this would be porn, not putting men in degrading positions and having sex with them. Here's a man at the stove on the phone, and the text says, you'll be home in 15 minutes. Perfect, as he creates dinner. So that, this is a joke because this isn't what's happening, because our culture doesn't show men on the billboards, men with vacuum cleaners saying, got to get that last spot. Women holding their babies and feeding them. Men sitting at the table with their kids, spooning food into the kids' mouths. No, that isn't part of our culture, which contributes to the violence of sexual assault and rape, along with all the gender things that I've talked about. Even in children's literature, there are few depictions of boys playing with dolls. In fact, there's a book that was written called William's Doll, which is a particular standout because it's about a little boy who really wanted a doll and whose father kept getting him trucks. But he wanted a doll to hold and care for. That's a very unusual book. The only one of its kind that I know of in the whole of children's literature. So the failure of our culture to provide dominant male figures participating, nurturing, caring, being gentle with one another and their children also contributes to a culture of sexual violence where men are ashamed of their needs and pushed into one dominant need accompanied by aggression, and that's sex. There are other things that are psychological, because in times of male vulnerability, which is, as we've said, outside the male stereotype, and the experience of loss of control, rape and sexual abuse go further and further. And they are allowed. Religions that promote rape and sexual abuse have gotten stronger. For example, in Moscow, Idaho, there's a church, an evangelical church, which is famous for promoting rape. It says, modern society has stripped men. This is Wilson, who's the head of that church. And we should say, as backdrop, although I should have said it before, that the Southern Conference on Men and Women, their gender guidelines, which still hold, is that women must be subordinate to men in all things. Men are to be protective, women are to be obedient and subordinate. Modern society has stripped men, this is Wilson, their evangelical preacher of this megachurch in Idaho. Modern society has stripped men of their intended roles, including their sexual mores. The sexual act cannot be made into an egalitarian pleasuring party. A man penetrates, conquers, colonizes, plants, while a woman receives, surrenders, accepts. True authority and true submission are an erotic necessity. That's amazing. And that is asserted in a lot of Republican messages. So, for example, Trump, our ex-president, bragged about grabbing women's pussies. He has 25 sexual offenses that he's committed that women are trying to get justice on. And he bragged about it. A woman on the Democratic committee said, "Hey, no wonder this girl looks like a 21-year-old prostitute." Who was she referring to? An 11-year-old gang raped by 18 men. These statements are allowed. And there is a section of this country that perpetuates rape and sexual abuse in this way. Now, we are particularly in a time of vulnerability for all of us, where all of us feel out of control. There's out of control unemployment, there's out of control disease, and sex abuse and rape go up in times of disaster. And of course, disasters are not only natural. I remember reading a wonderful article about Bangladesh when they talked about all these Bangladeshis dying in the natural disaster of flooding. But of course, the people who lived in brick houses didn't die. It's the people who lived in mud houses or flimsy stick houses that died. And the same thing is true in the pandemic, which is not only disease, it's out there, it's a disease, but it's an uncontrolled disease, which is why America has the most deaths per capita in the world, because we didn't prepare for it. We didn't arm our citizens against it, and we didn't stop it, and it continues. Whereas in nations where they did prepare people, they stopped it. Whether in China, it started in Wuhan, China. They closed the borders of Wuhan, a large area in China, built 11 hospitals, tested, tracked, and treated everyone, and they conquered the disease. The same is true in New Zealand. Where Jacinda Ardern, the socialist Labour Prime Minister, stopped the disease by also closing the borders, appealing on her citizens to help one another, to stay home unless there's an emergency, and to obey COVID regulations. And they did, and they stopped COVID. Not in the United States, where the president suppressed the evidence, where a whole group of people were encouraged by people like Mark Zuckerberg, who was making money off the hate mail on Facebook, and others encouraged people to think that their liberty was involved in not masking and not obeying COVID regulations. So we have the most deaths in the world for COVID. That's because we do have a sector that is violent. This is the same sector that winks at rape and humiliation of women. In hard times, people can feel out of control. And one of the male stereotypes is the man is in control. Now, in America, now that rapes and sexual abuses have mounted severely, men do feel out of control because this nation has not controlled the epidemic. They don't feel protected by their government because they're largely not. They don't feel protected at home because evictions are allowed again and because they're not protected. Everyone hasn't had to be vaccinated. And so they take control over women's bodies as a way of exerting control, just like they do in the military, in which they're bossed around every minute if they're service people. And at the top, they have that perk of male power that Cuomo and Epstein and Weinstein and R. Kelly had, to access women who have to be subordinate and give in. So that those are all cultural reasons that encourage rape. In a different area, if we look at class, there are class reasons that rape and sexual abuse not only have occurred, but have increased. Until the 1970s, until 2000, spousal rape was not considered a crime in every state. Women were not allowed to use birth control in the 1960s. Then they were allowed only if married and if their husbands agreed. They weren't allowed abortion rights, the right to control their own bodies, until 1973 with Roe versus Wade, which is being taken back by those same pro-rape, pro-women's subordination forces in the United States now. So that women were considered inferior and to be sexually used. And one reason why was our economy of the household. until very recently, was built on a feudal model. When I talk about class, it's important to know that even now, in many areas, and until recently almost everywhere, the household was what I would call, and what Marxists would call, a feudal area. Now, what do I mean by feudal? This isn't about the Middle Ages. What I mean by feudalism is the Marxian definition that one person works creating use values in an area owned by and controlled by the husband or the male. Women worked in the household. They created a certain amount of cleanliness, cooked food, order, childcare for themselves, and the rest was appropriated by their husband, the lord of the manor. And just as the serf and the lord in the Middle Ages pledged love and fidelity to one another, so did men and women in marriage. But men's fidelity was never enforced on the way that women's was. And what this did was it gave men the burden of maintaining a feudal household, a dependent woman and children. And it gave women some secure place, but no independence at all as a person, just like a feudal serf. So economically, the woman was a serf, producing useful things, of which she got a share enough to live, and the rest given to her husband and his children, or the man and his children. That's still an expectation of a lot of women, that if they're involved with a man, they're assigned to do the care work, to take care of their man emotionally, to take care of their man physically, to cook, to clean, to create order, to connect their man with other people, with his relatives, with his children. And that's a feudal class position. That's changing rapidly, so that kind of permission to rape because you're in control and she can't go anywhere is being withdrawn. The majority of women in the United States are now single by choice. And most divorces are initiated by women. And although women get about 15 cents less on every dollar, and 43% of us are still in pink-collar jobs that are lower paid, women can survive on our own, and that changes the dynamic to a more egalitarian, more equal dynamic. And that is changing, but for an awfully long time, even after the United States was declared free of the feudal system of Europe, at home, feudalism still continues in many households and continued in the vast majority until fairly recently. There's also another thing, and that's capitalism. Now, what does capitalism have to do with rape? Well, if we read the statement of the evangelical minister saying that men have a right to rape women, read that passage again. The sexual act cannot be made into an egalitarian pleasuring party. Instead, a man penetrates, conquers, colonizes, plants, while a woman receives, surrenders, accepts. He concludes that true authority and true submission are therefore an erotic necessity. Well, that penetrate, conquer, plant, that sounds just like the imperialist conquering of a country, doesn't it? which is tied to capitalist expansion of new markets and new people to exploit. In 1452, the reigning pope gave explorers permission to conquer, invade, and submit any people on any place they, quote, discovered that was not Christian, which gave them the right to subjugate. And so Christopher Columbus came to the United States, discovered it, even though people had been here since at least 300 BC, but discovered it and therefore had a right to rape Indian, or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say Indian, and that's correct. I should say instead indigenous American women, and to try to force all indigenous people into slavery. It didn't work with the indigenous Americans, so they had to import Africans without a unified language or culture, Africans from different places. But they got permission from the Catholic Church. And rape here is the male conquering, invading, submitting, which has been a factor of capitalism for a long time. You come in and you exploit. And you exploit the resources of any people that you can. You exploit the people and force them to work for less. And there you have it. So it's also very much a feature of capitalism. One of the reasons that Kristen Godsey, in her excellent book, Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism, talks about why sex is better according to both men and women. It was interesting. One thing that she cites, which shows it so well, is questions of women in East Germany and West Germany about who has better sex. And later, when the wall breaks down, questions of men and women, which women have better sex, one's from East Germany or one's from West Germany, and men, who has better sex with women, freer sex, women who were from East Germany rather than West Germany, because West Germany was capitalist and East Germany wasn't. So women had economic equality and support from the state. And that leads me on to the conclusion I want to come to, which is America can stop being the world leaders in rape, which we are now. Just like we could, of course, stop being the world leaders in COVID death, which we also are. But we can stop that. We can stop it through huge federal money poured into changing the culture, into having different kind of videos out there, different kind of ads on the buses, different kind of employment practices, different kind of adjudication around children, so that there is family leave, so that there are paternity leaves as well as maternity leaves, and so that men, like they are in Norway, cannot come back early from a paternity leave and try to get extra credit or extra money from not staying home with their children. All of those things that every other Western industrial and many non-Western industrial countries have. We could do that. It requires a financial investment, and it also requires a cultural investment in music, in film, in ads, in video games, in schools, in sex education. Of course we could do it. If they can do it elsewhere, of course we can. Then we don't have to be the world leaders in sex abuse and rape. And so here you can see why something like rape is created by all these other forces together in our very predatory capitalist system. You'd need a strong socialist influence to pass the positive things, just like you needed a strong socialist influence in the New Deal. Frances Perkins was a socialist, and she was the head of labor. Other union officials were hired, communist and socialist, because they knew that to save this place, you needed socialism. And I think we need that now, as rape and sexual abuse are increasing and out of control. Thank you. That's all for today. Thank you for watching and listening. Thank you for any input you want to give. Thank you for being a Patreon subscriber who helps sustain us. Goodbye.